In the dim light of dawn, the forest stretched out like a living labyrinth. The air was thick with the scent of pine and earth, a smell that clung to the hunter's clothes as he ventured deeper into the woods. Every step he took seemed to echo, the crunch of leaves underfoot amplified in the eerie silence. The hunter was no stranger to these woods, but today, something felt different. The trees seemed closer, their branches clawing at the sky, and the shadows between them deeper than usual. He paused, listening, and heard a faint whisper, as if the wind itself was trying to communicate. Dismissing it as his imagination, he pressed on, unaware that the forest was far from ordinary today. As he moved further, the whisper grew louder, forming words he couldn't quite make out. His grip tightened on his rifle, a chill running down his spine. He was being watched. He could feel eyes on him, though he saw nothing but trees. The undergrowth rustled, but when he turned, there was nothing there. He quickened his pace, but the forest seemed to stretch endlessly. The hunter's instincts screamed at him to leave, but he was too deep now, too far to turn back easily. The whispers followed him, growing more insistent, more urgent, until they were almost a scream. Something ancient and malevolent had woken in the heart of the forest, and it was aware of him. As night fell, the forest transformed into an abyss. The hunter made camp, his small fire casting flickering shadows that danced on the surrounding trees. The whispers had subsided with the arrival of darkness, replaced by an unsettling silence. He tried to shake off the unease, but the quiet was oppressive, as if the forest was holding its breath. As he settled into his sleeping bag, something caught his eye: footprints just beyond the edge of the firelight. They were fresh, but not his own. Larger, deeper, and heading straight towards his camp before veering off into the darkness. He stood, rifle in hand, scanning the darkness for any signs of movement. But there was nothing. The wind had died down completely, and even the usual sounds of nocturnal animals were absent. It was as if the forest itself was frozen, waiting. He decided to follow the tracks, curiosity overpowering caution. They led him deeper into the woods, the firelight quickly fading behind him. The prints were erratic, as if whatever made them was dragging something heavy. The hunter's heart pounded as he reached a small clearing. In the center was a circle of stones, arranged with precision, and in the middle, the remains of a campfire, still smoldering. He wasn't alone in the forest. Someone or something was out here with him, and it was close. Sleep was elusive, and the hunter spent the night with one eye open, every rustle of leaves setting his nerves on edge. As dawn broke, he packed up camp, eager to put distance between himself and whatever had made those tracks. But the forest seemed determined to keep him within its grasp. The paths he had known so well were twisted and unfamiliar. Every turn led him deeper into the unknown. He began to notice subtle signs that he was being followed. A broken branch here, disturbed earth there, all too deliberate to be the work of animals. The hunter's senses were sharp, but whatever was stalking him was sharper, always staying just out of sight. High above, the trees seemed to lean inwards, as if they were watching him too, their gnarled branches like twisted fingers reaching down to ensnare him. By midday, the hunter was certain he was not alone. He caught glimpses of movement in the corner of his eye, figures darting between the trees, shadows where there should be none. His grip tightened on his rifle, but a growing fear gnawed at his confidence. He was being hunted. The realization hit him like a cold wave. He wasn't the predator here, he was the prey. The watcher in the trees was not of this world, and it wondered him to know it was there, patiently waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The forest was alive with the scent of blood. It was faint at first, barely noticeable, but as the hunter moved deeper, it grew stronger, almost overpowering. His heart raced, adrenaline surging as he tried to pinpoint its source. He followed the scent, each step deliberate and cautious, until he stumbled upon a gruesome scene. A deer, or what was left of it, lay sprawled across the forest floor. Its body was torn open, flesh and bone exposed, but there were no signs of a struggle. No tracks, no broken branches, just the mangled corpse, as if it had been dropped from the sky. The hunter knelt beside the carcass, inspecting the wounds. They were precise, too precise for an animal attack. The realization that something far more dangerous than a wolf or bear was responsible chilled him to the core. He stood abruptly, every instinct screaming at him to leave, but he knew he couldn't outrun whatever had done this. It was too fast, too powerful. As he turned to leave, a sound froze him in place, a low, guttural growl coming from the shadows just beyond the trees. The hunter spun around, rifle at the ready, but saw nothing. The growl came again, closer this time, vibrating through the ground beneath his feet. He backed away slowly, knowing that the forest had become a trap, and he was caught in the center of it. The scent of blood filled his nostrils, and he realized with dawning horror that it was no longer just the deer's. It was his own. The hunter moved through the forest with a newfound urgency, the sense of dread growing with every step. The trees seemed to close in around him, their branches forming a twisted cage. He could feel the presence following him, always just out of sight, a constant shadow. And then the laughter started. It began as a faint echo, barely audible over the rustling leaves. But it grew louder, more distinct, until it surrounded him, coming from every direction. It was a child's laughter, high-pitched and innocent, but there was something deeply wrong about it. The hunter's blood ran cold as the laughter turned into a chorus, overlapping voices that filled the air with a sound that was both mocking and menacing. He spun around, trying to locate the source, but the forest played tricks on his senses. Every time he thought he had pinpointed the direction, the laughter would shift, as if the trees themselves were laughing at him. Panic gripped him as the laughter grew more intense, more frenzied, and he started to run. The forest blurred around him, the trees a wall of green and brown, the ground a blur beneath his feet. But no matter how fast he ran, the laughter followed, relentless and unforgiving. It felt like it was inside his head, echoing in his skull, driving him to the brink of madness. He stumbled, falling to his knees, hands over his ears, but the sound only grew louder. He screamed, but his voice was swallowed by the forest, drowned out by the never-ending laughter. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the laughter stopped, leaving only the hunter's ragged breathing and the suffocating silence of the forest. The hunter was left in a daze, the silence that followed the laughter oppressive and unnatural. He continued through the forest, but his surroundings seemed to shift with every step. The trees twisted and contorted, their trunks warping as if the forest itself was trying to disorient him. He felt as though he was walking through a distorted reflection of the world he knew. And then, in a small clearing, he saw it, a mirror, standing upright in the middle of the woods. Its surface was cracked, the shards of glass reflecting the fragmented image of the forest around it. The hunter approached cautiously, drawn to it despite the unease gnawing at his gut. When he looked into the mirror, his own reflection stared back at him, but it was wrong. The eyes in the reflection were not his own. They were cold, empty, and devoid of life. The cracks in the glass seemed to spread, spiderwebbing across the surface, and with a loud snap, the mirror shattered completely. The hunter stumbled back, but the shards of glass remained suspended in the air, floating around him like a halo. They began to spin, faster and faster, until they became a blur, and then they stopped, hanging motionless in the air. His reflection reappeared in each shard, but now it was twisted, deformed, and filled with malice. The hunter felt a sharp pain in his chest, as if the shards were cutting into him, though they remained at a distance. He realized with a jolt that the reflection in the glass was more than just an image. It was alive, and it was trying to escape. He turned and fled, the sound of shattering glass echoing in his ears, but no matter how far he ran, he could still feel the cold eyes of his reflection watching him, following him, waiting for the moment to strike. The forest was darker now, the sun completely obscured by thick clouds that seemed to hang just above the treetops. The hunter's breath came in short gasps, his exhaustion evident in every step. He was trapped in a nightmare that had no end, and his mind was fraying under the pressure. The whispers had returned, more insistent than before, but now they were accompanied by something worse, a low, guttural scream that seemed to vibrate through the very ground he walked on. The scream was faint, as if muffled by the earth itself, but it grew louder with each passing minute. It was a sound of pure agony, a sound that spoke of suffering beyond comprehension. The hunter tried to block it out, but it drilled into his skull, reverberating in his bones. He stumbled through the forest, his vision blurring as the scream intensified. The trees around him seemed to pulse in time with the sound, their bark splitting and cracking as if the forest itself was in pain. He covered his ears, but it was no use. The scream was inside him now, a part of him. He dropped to his knees, the weight of the sound pressing down on him, crushing him. And then, without warning, it stopped. The forest was silent once more, but the hunter could still feel the echoes of the scream vibrating through his body. He stood shakily, trying to regain his composure, but he knew that something had changed. The forest was no longer just a place, it was alive, and it was feeding off his fear. He had to get out, but he was hopelessly lost, and the forest was not about to let him go. The hunter was a shell of his former self, his once sharp instincts dulled by fear and exhaustion. He moved through the forest like a man in a daze, his mind numb to everything but the overwhelming need to escape. But the forest had other plans. As he stumbled through the undergrowth, he became aware of something following him. It was subtle at first. A rustle of leaves here, a snapped twig there, but soon it became impossible to ignore. He was being stalked. The hunter quickened his pace, but the presence matched him, staying just out of sight, always one step behind. He spun around, rifle at the ready, but saw nothing. The air was thick with tension, every sound amplified in the oppressive silence. The hunter's heart pounded in his chest as he realized that whatever was following him was not human, and it was far more dangerous than anything he had encountered before. He could feel its eyes on him, boring into his back, but whenever he turned to confront it, the presence would vanish, leaving only the rustling leaves as a reminder that it was still there. The hunter tried to shake off the fear, but it clung to him like a second skin, making it hard to think, hard to breathe. The forest was playing with him, wearing him down, and he knew that it was only a matter of time before the unseen stalker made its move. He had to find a way out, but the forest was a maze, and every path led him deeper into its heart. The hunter was no longer in control. He was a puppet, and the forest was pulling the strings. The hunter's journey had become a waking nightmare. The forest around him was a twisted version of reality, the trees warped and gnarled, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. The air was thick with a sense of foreboding, and the hunter knew that the end was near. He was close to the heart of the forest now, the place where the malevolence that had been stalking him for days was strongest. The shadows here were darker, deeper, and they seemed to move of their own accord, creeping towards him as if drawn by his fear. The hunter could feel the weight of the darkness pressing down on him, suffocating him. Every step was a struggle, his body heavy and sluggish, as if the very ground was trying to pull him under. He could hear the whispers again, but now they were clearer, more distinct. They spoke of death, of despair, of the countless souls that had been lost to the forest's grasp. The hunter knew that he was next. He had been marked from the moment he entered the forest, and now there was no escape. The shadows closed in around him, their touch icy and cold, draining the light from his body. He tried to fight, but it was futile. The darkness was too strong, too powerful. The hunter could feel himself slipping away, his strength fading as the shadows enveloped him. He closed his eyes, accepting his fate, and let the darkness take him. The hunter's world had narrowed to a single point of focus, the darkness that surrounded him, pressing in from all sides. He was barely conscious, his mind slipping in and out of awareness as the malevolent force that had been stalking him for so long finally closed its grip around him. The forest was silent now, the whispers gone, the laughter silenced. Only the steady thrum of the darkness remained, a pulsing, living thing that fed on his fear, his despair. The hunter could feel his life slipping away, his breaths shallow and labored. He knew he was dying, but there was no fear now, only a strange sense of peace. The struggle was over, and the hunter was too tired to care anymore. As he took his final breath, he felt the darkness shift, as if it was preparing to consume him completely. But then, in the last moments of his life, something unexpected happened. The darkness recoiled, as if in pain, and the hunter felt a sudden surge of warmth, a light that pierced the blackness and filled him with a sense of calm. It was brief, a fleeting moment, but it was enough. The hunter's final breath was not one of fear, but of acceptance. The darkness hesitated, faltering, and for the first time, the hunter felt a glimmer of hope. And then, with a final sigh, the hunter was gone, his body limp and lifeless in the heart of the forest. The darkness lingered for a moment, uncertain, before slowly retreating, leaving the forest in silence once more. The hunter was free, his spirit at peace, and the forest, though still dark and malevolent, had lost its grip on him. The nightmare was over, but the forest remained, waiting for the next soul to stumble into its embrace.